Aristotle, Mencius is a defender of moral perfectionism about the good life. On this view, to live well is to become a morally virtuous person. There are some important differences between Aristotle's moral perfectionism on the one hand and Mencius's on the other. One of them is, as we'll see in a second, that for Aristotle, becoming virtuous is about aiming at and hitting the mean with respect to your emotions, not to feel too much fear, not to feel too little fear, but just the right amount. An intermediate amount is proper to virtue, according to Aristotle. Mencius, on the other hand, for him, the fully virtuous person has a very radical kind of compassion for all people at all times to the maximum degree. This is the virtue of benevolence in its sort of full flower for Mencius, or what he calls Ren. The other difference between Aristotle and Mencius is methodological. So Aristotle gives us an argument, the function argument, and he conducts his philosophy largely through giving sort of step-by-step logical deductive arguments for conclusions. In Mencius, what we encounter is a way of doing philosophy by way of telling stories. And that's not to say that these aren't rational or intended to be persuasive, because they certainly are. But instead, I think the way to think about what Mencius is doing is that Mencius is painting a picture of what the well-lived life looks like by way of a story, or a couple of stories that we'll discuss, and then also a picture by way of a story about how to become a good person morally, and so how to live well. And he holds this up to you as something for your consideration, whether you find it to be a plausible and attractive view of the good life or not, as opposed to giving you a sort of premise, conclusion kind of argument. So his first story that we're going to look at illustrates this deep optimism that Mencius has about human nature. So the psychological egoist says that effectively the only thing we are capable of desiring for its own sake is our own self-interest. Mencius rejects that completely. For Mencius, he thinks that all of us have within us the emotional seeds of altruism. And in particular, we all have the ability to care about one another for the other's own sake, to love in the truest sense, not to think of the other as an instrument to my own self-interest. So he gives the story of the child at the well that I had you read. And this is supposed to illustrate this kind of optimism. Here's what he says. No man is devoid of a heart sensitive to the suffering of others. My reason for saying this is this. Suppose a man were, all of a sudden, to see a young child on the verge of falling into a well. He would certainly be moved to compassion, not because he wanted to get in the good grace of his parents, nor because he wished to win the praise of his fellow villagers and friends, nor yet because he disliked the cry of the child. From this it can be seen that whoever is devoid of the heart of shame is not human, whoever is devoid of the heart of courtesy and modesty is not human, and whoever is devoid of the heart of right and wrong is not human. So what's going on here? I mean, a very simple little story. He says, suppose a man, we don't know who this person is, it's just an arbitrary person, were to come across a child on the verge of falling into the well. The man doesn't know the child. Nevertheless, Mencius confidently predicts that the man will feel a welling up of compassion toward the child. And he's very clear that the welling up of compassion, the feeling of, oh, there's another person there who is in some sort of danger, and that I can identify with, that is not an instrumental thing for this man. The man isn't thinking to himself, if I save that child, I might get in the good graces of the people watching. He's not thinking to himself, boy, it's really annoying to hear the child crying and I want that to stop, so maybe I'll help. It's none of that. It's just this simple, what he calls elsewhere, an emotional seed. It's just this tiny germ or seed of, another person feeling pain. I know what that's like. I need to help. Um, and interestingly, he doesn't say whether the man goes on to help or not. So we're left not knowing whether the man feels this emotion and then walks along by, or instead whether the man then acts. And I think that's probably intentional. Um, Mencius is not so optimistic as to think that all of us not only feel these emotions, but also then act appropriately on them. We have weak wills, and especially when we are not yet fully trained in virtue, we may feel compassion, but also feel the pull of self-interest and think, oh, I'm late for a meeting or something like that, and think I'm not gonna bother with that, or that's not my business. I'm not gonna worry about that, and I'm gonna be along my way. We do sometimes succumb to self-interest in the face of our benevolent and good impulses to the contrary. But the point for Mencius is that those benevolent and good impulses, that feeling of compassion, is there for all humans, according to him. Aristotle, if you read further into the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle is in some places optimistic about human nature, and in some places he is pessimistic in the following sense. He is less willing to say that all human beings, regardless of who they are capable of becoming virtuous. He has some really horrible things to say about large classes of people who he think aren't sort of equipped well enough to become virtuous. Mencius is very different. Mencius thinks regardless of who you are, what your background is, you can become not just better, but in principle, you have what you need already inside you to become a sage or a fully virtuous person. The virtues for Mencius are not courage and honesty. They're not some of the virtues that we maybe are more familiar with in our culture. He lists four, and the most important of these virtues is compassion, is benevolence, or Ren, and the emotional basis of that virtue is compassion. He also lists the virtue of dutifulness, or Yi, and its emotional basis is the feeling of shame. Feeling of shame at having not fulfilled one's role socially. Another virtue for him is propriety, or Li, and its emotional basis is respect. And then finally, fourth, the virtue of wisdom, or Ji, is the flowering of the emotion of approval and disapproval. The most important one, the chief one, is the virtue of benevolence, and indeed he speaks of the benevolent person as a shorthand for the virtuous person. So the next question then is, well, if we all have this emotional seed, as he puts it, or germ of the full-fledged virtue of benevolence, how do we develop our compassion, our natural feelings of compassion, to such an extent that they both move us appropriately to action, and also that they are sufficiently attuned more widely than perhaps we're naturally inclined? And here, Mencius gives us this story of a king. And Mencius is giving advice to this king. The king brings Mencius in and says, how do I become a true king? And by that he means, how do I become a virtuous king? And he's sort of initially not sure, the king isn't, whether he has what it takes to become a true king. Mencius assures him that he does. But he goes on to make clear, you're not there yet. But you do have what it takes, because everybody has what it takes to become virtuous. And rather than answering the question of, okay, what do I then do to become virtuous, rather than answering that directly, Mencius goes off and tells another story. So this is a story within a story, He tells a story about that he heard from a friend of his he's like, hey, you want to know how to become virtuous? Well, first let me tell you this story I heard, king. And the story is about the king himself. So he heard this report about something the king did, and he's now giving to the king this report and asking him to think about it. So here was the report. The king was sitting in the upper part of the hall, and somebody led an ox through the lower part. The king noticed this and said, where is the ox going? The blood of the ox is to be used for consecrating a new bell, is what was told to him. The king then says, spare it. I cannot bear to see it shrinking with fear like an innocent man going to the place of execution. In that place, should the ceremony be abandoned? That is out of the question, says the king. Use the lamb instead. Mencius then says, I wonder if this is true. And the king says, yeah, I guess that I did do that, a few days ago. And then Mencius says, the heart behind your action is sufficient to enable you to become a true king. The people all thought that you grudged the expense, but for my part, I have no doubt that you were moved by pity for the animal. And the king affirms, yes, this is right. And they go on to note there's something puzzling about this story here, which is that the king sees this ox being dragged before him to the slaughter for a sacrifice. And he sees in the ox's eyes the expression of a fear of pain, a fear of death. The ox knows what's coming and it's terrified. And the king is moved to pity, just as the person passing by the child about to fall into the well is moved to pity. And the king cannot stand to see this happen right in front of him. So he holds out his hand and says, spare the ox. Interestingly, though, he then is asked, well, then what are we to do? Are we going to call off the sacrifice? And the king says, no, just use a lamb instead of the ox. And what's puzzling about that is that, of course, the lamb will be just as frightened as the ox was. This isn't made explicit, but I think part of what's going on is that the king is instructing them not just to bring a lamb, but to probably bring it out of his sight. So he's like, go get a lamb and just don't bring it in front of me, right? I don't want to see its eyes. I don't want to see it. I don't want to hear it calling out as an innocent man being led to the place of execution. And so Mencius points out to him, there's something inconsistent about this reaction. On the one hand, you have a good and right and just pity and feeling of compassion for this animal that you recognize as as something capable of suffering. This is the ox, and you therefore act on that. So he even has a little bit more than the man at the well. He acts appropriately on this feeling of compassion, says, spare the ox. But then on the other hand, rather than saying, maybe we don't need to sacrifice an innocent animal, maybe we should call off the celebration, or maybe we should just replace that part of the ceremony, he says, no, go kill an animal, just make sure I don't see it. And Mencius says that is not a rational pairing there. He later says this: should someone say to you, I'm strong enough to lift 100 chin, but not a feather. I have eyes that can see the tip of a fine hair, but not a cartload of firewood. Mencius asks, would you accept the truth of such a statement? And the king says, no, I wouldn't. The lesson there is that the king can naturally feel compassion toward the ox, and it is equally as easy, indeed perhaps easier, for him to feel compassion toward the lamb, but he prevents himself from feeling it by telling people not to bring the lamb in front of him. And Mencius says the consistent thing to do is to use your reason to notice that there's no difference, rationally speaking, between suffering that occurs in the mind of an animal that you happen to be seeing on the one hand, and suffering in the mind of an animal that you don't see on the other. There's no difference between those two. It's just whether one happens to pass in front of your eyes. And the natural tendency is to avert your gaze. And this is why he tells them not to bring the lamb in front of him. But because it's natural doesn't always mean that it is rational or right or moral. The moral and right and rational thing, according to Mencius, is to notice the inconsistency and think, well, I took pity on the ox, so the consistent thing for me to do is to take pity on the lamb as well and spare it. Of course, the original question was not about animals. The original question was about how do I become a virtuous king? But Mencius is very clear that they're not completely unrelated, in fact. The feeling of compassion and pity that one has toward the animals is deeply psychologically connected to one's ability to feel compassion toward other people, especially other people who are unlike you. Other people who perhaps you don't see on a day-to-day basis, or other people who don't speak your language or any language. Here's what he says. Why, this is Mencius. Why should it be different in your own case? Your bounty is sufficient to reach the animals, yet the benefits of your government fail to reach the people. That a feather is not lifted is because one fails to make the effort. That a cartload of firewood is not seen is because one fails to use one's eyes. Similarly, that peace is not brought to the people is because you fail to practice kindness. Hence, your failure to become a true king is due to your refusal to act, not an inability to act. So what we have is the initial question, Mencius, how can I become a virtuous king? How can I treat my people better? It's hard. And Mencius says, you have the seed there. I saw it, or I heard about it when you experienced compassion toward that ox that was right in front of your eyes. You didn't, though, extend that compassion to the lamb, nor do you extend that same compassion to your people. But the first step for you would be to use your reason to notice this inconsistency and then begin to extend your compassion, maybe even in the first place, just to other animals. Use what you have and extend that outward to things that, as he later puts it, you can bear. And then once you've done that, you can further expand the circle and begin to feel compassion for the people for whom you may not have initially felt that same tinge of or twinge of pity. So the suggestion that Mencius gives us about becoming more virtuous is to extend our benevolence, is the way he puts it. He says this, for every man there are things he cannot bear. To extend this to what he can bear is benevolence. If a man can extend to the full his natural aversion to harming others, then there will be an overabundance of benevolence. Later he says, among babes in arms there are none that do not know to love their parents. Treating one's parents as parents is benevolence. Revering one's elders is righteousness. There is nothing else to do but extend these to the world. So this is a very radical picture of what virtue is. And it's different from Aristotle, who says you should be trying to hit the mean. And, Mencius isn't necessarily saying never aim for the mean in any category of your life. But when it comes to compassion, Mencius says the mean is not where you should stop. You should go into overabundance. You should feel compassion toward all sufferers. And that is a lifelong project for you. This does, though, raise a couple of important questions, this picture of virtue that we get from Mencius. The Mencius or the Confucian sage who feels compassion and love not just for his parents, not just for his community, but for all, is a rare kind of person. There are very few of these. And that may be no accident. I mean, one question for you to consider is this psychologically possible? I know that I certainly can work on feeling compassion a little bit further outside of my own community, but is it literally limitless? Or are human beings sort of hardwired to only be able to feel these feelings of compassion toward those with whom they have some kind of relationship, whether it's biological or not, whether it's maybe social, friendship, or somebody who is part of the university community. Is it really possible to extend our compassion to the whole world? And then the second question is, if this is possible, is it really a desirable ideal? So it could be that it's possible for us to do this, but as we'll discuss next time when we discuss Susan Wolf, you might think there's something almost inhuman about somebody who loves literally everyone, including those who spit in their face, including those who hate them, including those who want to do harm to them. I mean, this is the radical picture that Mencius is suggesting that interestingly aligns, I think, with certain religious impulses as well, that to love your enemy. I think some people hear the idea of loving your enemy and think that's like weakness, right? Like that's not a good life. That's one where you get run down and walked on. I think that's the challenge. Is this a desirable ideal, even if it's possible?